Chapter 12 of Best Russian Short Stories. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to find out how you can volunteer, visit LibriVox.org. Best Russian Short Stories. Edited and compiled by Thomas Seltzer. The Darling by Anton P. Chekhov. Olenka, the daughter of the retired collegiate assessor Plevyanikov, was sitting on the back door steps of her house, doing nothing. It was hot, the flies were nagging and teasing, and it was pleasant to think that it would soon be evening. Dark rain clouds were gathering from the east, wafting a breath of moisture every now and then. Kukin, who roomed in the wing of the same house, was standing in the yard looking up at the sky. He was the manager of the Tivoli, an open-air theater. "Again," he said despairingly. "Rain again. Rain, rain, rain. Every day rain. As though to spite me, I might as well stick my head into a noose and be done with it. It's ruining me. Heavy losses every day." He wrung his hands and continued, addressing Olenka. "What a life, Olga Semyonovna! It's enough to make a man weep. He works, he does his best, his very best. He tortures himself. He passes sleepless nights. He thinks and thinks and thinks how to do everything just right. And what is the result? He gives the public the best operetta, the very best pantomime, excellent artists. But do they want it? Have they the least appreciation of it? The public is rude. The public is a great bore. The public wants a circus, a lot of nonsense, a lot of stuff. And there's the weather. Look, rain, almost every evening. It began to rain on the 10th of May, and it's kept it up through the whole of June. It's simply awful. I can't get any audiences. And don't I have to pay rent? Don't I have to pay the actors?" The next day, towards evening, the clouds gathered again, and Kukin said, with an hysterical laugh, "Ah, I don't care. Let it do its worst. Let it drown the whole theater, and me too. All right. No luck for me in this world or the next. Let the actors bring suit against me and drag me to court. What's the court? Why not Siberia at hard labor, or even the scaffold? It was the same on the third day. Olenka listened to Kukin seriously, in silence. Sometimes tears would rise to her eyes. At last, Kukin's misfortune touched her. She fell in love with him. He was short, gaunt, with a yellow face, and curly hair combed back from his forehead, and a thin tenor voice. His features puckered all up when he spoke. Despair was ever inscribed on his face, and yet he awakened in Olenka a sincere, deep feeling. She was always loving somebody. She couldn't get on without loving somebody. She had loved her sick father, who sat the whole time in his armchair in a darkened room, breathing heavily. She had loved her aunt, who came from Brianska once or twice a year to visit them. And before that, when a pupil at the pro-gymnasium, she had loved her French teacher. She was a quiet, kind-hearted, compassionate girl, with a soft, gentle way about her, and she made a very healthy, wholesome impression. looking at her full rosy cheeks, at her soft white neck with the black mole, and at the good naive smile that always played on her face when something pleasant was said, the men would think, not so bad, and would smile too. And the lady visitors, in the middle of the conversation, would suddenly grasp her hand and exclaim, "You darling!" in a burst of delight. The house, hers by inheritance, in which she had lived from birth, was located at the outskirts of the city on the Gypsy Road, not far from the Tivoli. From early evening till late at night she could hear the music in the theater and the bursting of the rockets, and it seemed to her that Kukin was roaring and battling with his fate, and taking his chief enemy, the indifferent public, by assault. Her heart melted softly. She felt no desire to sleep, and when Kukin returned home towards morning, she tapped on her window pane, and through the curtains he saw her face and one shoulder and the kind smile she gave him. He proposed to her, and they were married. And when he had a good look of her neck and her full, vigorous shoulders, he clapped his hands and said, "You darling!" He was happy. But it rained on their wedding day, and the expression of despair never left his face. They got along well together. She sat in the cashier's box, kept the theater in order, wrote down the expenses, and paid out the salaries. Her rosy cheeks, her kind, naive smile, like a halo around her face, could be seen at the cashier's window, behind the scenes, and in the cafe. She began to tell her friends that the theater was the greatest, the most important, the most essential thing in the world, that it was the only place to obtain true enjoyment in, and become humanized and educated. "But do you suppose the public appreciates it?" she asked. "What the public wants is the circus. Yesterday Vanichka and I gave 'Faust Burlesque,' and almost all the boxes were empty. If we had given some silly nonsense, I assure you the theater would have been overcrowded. Tomorrow we'll put 'Orpheus in Hades' on. Do come." Whatever Kukin said about the theater and the actors, she repeated. She spoke, as he did, with contempt of the public, of its indifference to art, of its boorishness. She meddled in the rehearsals, corrected the actors, watched the conduct of the musicians, and when an unfavorable criticism appeared in the local paper, she wept and went to the editor to argue with him. The actors were fond of her, and called her Vanichka and I, and the darling. She was sorry for them, and lent them small sums. When they bilked her, she never complained to her husband. At the utmost, she shed a few tears. In winter, too, they got along nicely together. They leased a theater in the town for the whole winter, and sublet it, for short periods, to a little Russian theatrical company, to a conjurer, and to the local amateur players. Olenka grew fuller and was always beaming with contentment, while Kukin grew thinner and yellower and complained of his terrible losses, though he did fairly well the whole winter. At night he coughed, and she gave him raspberry syrup and lime water, rubbed him with eau de cologne, and wrapped him up with soft coverings. "You are my precious sweet," she said with perfect sincerity, stroking his hair